So the Ottomans have arrived at the very gate of Catholic Christendom, and shockwaves have reverberated throughout Europe because this is something they did not expect. This was not anticipated. And what's worse is that the person who is actually sending this army is the same person that a couple of decades ago has already conquered the heart of Orthodox Christendom, which was Constantinople. So people are scared, and the Ottomans have arrived in Italy. Hi, my name is Misha and welcome to Tarihi Tales. If you like this channel and if you want to help it grow and if you want to help it continue, there are a couple of ways you can help out. The best way is to go on Patreon and become a patron of. Other than this, you can also go to the link in the description box and become a member of this YouTube channel, or you can help out with the number on screen if you're in Pakistan. Also, like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff really helps us out as well. Thank you. So, why Italy? What are the Ottomans doing in Italy? So, there are a couple of factors at play here. By the late 1470s, Mehmet II, who is the conqueror of Constantinople, he has already established the Ottoman Empire as a dominant force in the Mediterranean. His conquests include, obviously, Constantinople, the Morea, significant parts of the Balkans, but there are still a couple of pieces that are loose. There are strongholds of the Venetians and the Hungarians in the Balkans. At the same time, we have the Knights Hospitaller of St. Rhodes, which pose a huge threat to the Ottomans. And within the same time frame, when you look at Italy, Italy is divided. There are a lot of different forces which are battling each other out, like the Papal States, Florence, Naples. All of these different players are kind of against each other and Italy is divided. So the timing is extremely strategic, and Mehmet sees an opportunity and he takes it. Now, at the same time, some historians also talk about how Mehmet had some personal goals that he wanted to achieve. By this point, as we've talked about, he's already conquered Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, and that was the hub of Orthodox Christendom. And he's kind of earned a title called the Protector of Orthodox Christians and Emperor of Eastern Rome. However, some historians feel that what Mehmet really wanted to do was he thought that, well, Italy is weak, I can attack Italy, which is the center of Catholic Christendom, and then I can kind of be the leader of all of these different aspects of Christianity as well. Because the Ottoman Empire was, for the majority of its history, not a Muslim majority empire. There were a lot of different religions, especially Christians, which could be found in the Ottoman Empire, and their rights were quite significantly protected, and they were given a lot of liberties and freedom of religion. Historians believe that Mehmet wanted to kind of become like the Caesar of Rome. So all of these ambitions were also kind of at play, and at the same time, because there was a weakness in that area as well, that also counted for something. But when you look at the Ottoman historians, the Ottoman chroniclers, and when you look at their sources, a different story emerges. Hoca Saadatin, in his book Takut Tehvari, might have butchered the pronunciation, but he talks about how this person, Gidik Ahmed Pasha, actually was tasked with taking out this resistance in Albania, and then he approached the Ottoman king and he talked about how he can also conquer this area called Apulia, which is modern day Apulia. So it's said that when he gave out this proposition to Mehmet gave him the resources, the troops, the navy power, and then he was able to capture Apulia first and then Otranto. So other sources say how maybe the Venetians actually urged Mehmet to kind of attack because, as I mentioned, they were in constant warfare with each other. But at the same time, the real reason is obviously is history. We don't really know what was the actual reason, but these are the things that are coming forward because the Ottoman histories actually don't talk a lot about the conquest of Otranto. It looks as if it was kind of insignificant for them, but for European side it had huge repercussions because this was something that was their worst fear. This was a stepping stone to kind of conquering Europe for the Ottomans, and this is something nobody in Europe wanted. So that's a bit about how and why the Ottomans decided to go towards Italy. Now, for this Italian campaign, Mehmet II actually did meticulous planning. He was a great planner, which we've seen from the conquest of Constantinople. He appointed Gidik Ahmed Pasha, one of his most trusted commanders, to lead the expedition. And they put together an impressive fleet with 132 vessels and 28 galleys. So troops were gathered, supplies were gathered. The city of Elvonia, which is modern-day Vlorë in Albania, that was fortified and strengthened to kind of become the stronghold from where they would launch the attack. Mehmet also had a huge network of spies and informants, and they were kind of like loose in Italy, and they gave back useful information. One of the people, called Iskandar Pasha, actually reported the city of Apulia was especially susceptible towards conquest. It could be easily conquered, and that kind of gave them some more fuel. It kind of emboldened the Ottomans, because the intel was saying that what you're trying to do is going to be easily done. Now, among the preparations were also these massive bombards, which the Ottomans kind of took to Vlorë in Albania. And once they had, as I mentioned, they were fortifying the area. Once they had secured Vlorë and they'd set up this base, by July of 1480, the fleet of the Ottomans was ready, and it was crossing the Adriatic and landed in Otranto, Italy. This is a city in the south of Italy, and it was ruled at that time by King Ferdinand of Naples. There was a huge battle for the city, and the Ottomans were eventually able to conquer the city of Otranto. Now, once the city was actually conquered, there was this huge propaganda campaign that kind of swept throughout Europe, because what was happening was that obviously it was a battle. There were definitely deaths and there was definitely casualties. And since the Ottomans were the victors, obviously there must have been more casualties on the side of the Italians. But what happened was that historians today talk about how kind of like a smear campaign was swept throughout Europe after this, where false information was spread about this Ottoman attack on Otranto. And this played a really significant role in the mind of the Europeans as to how they perceived the Ottomans, because they were fed all this information, which turned out later wasn't really true, but the image of the Ottomans was solidified in their minds. Now, the examples of the propaganda would be something like there were some reports of how the attack was so brutal that 800 civilians of Otranto were brutally killed by the Ottomans, including the Archbishop Stefano Bardinelli. Some other accounts talked about how 12,000 people were killed in Otranto out of the 22,000 residents. These claims eventually turned out to be false, but the barbaric image of the Ottomans kind of spread throughout Europe. They were already afraid of them, and this just added fuel to the fire. There's actually a reason why these stories were spread, because the church kind of wanted people in Europe to be scared of the Ottomans so they could come together and then carry out a massive crusade against the Ottomans. Because as we see in the future, the Pope is constantly calling for a crusade against the Ottomans, not even Islam, against the Ottomans. But the European states aren't really ready. The fact that in 1539, a couple of decades later, the same Archbishop was also canonized, he was officially proclaimed a saint by the church, were also kind of added fuel to the fire which is already going on, and the sentiments of the Europeans were kind of being played with. Now, on the Ottoman side, once they had Otranto, that was just the start. They didn't want to stop at Otranto. That was the first stepping stone. So Ahmed Pasha had more plans. They were now going to attack other territories. However, the campaign was abruptly halted because on May 19, 1481, Mehmet II passes away. And along with him, this campaign in Italy kind of came to an immediate halt, because now back in the Ottoman Empire, a battle for the succession has started between the two remaining sons of Sultan Mehmet, Bayezid and Cem. So suddenly there's nobody to kind of lead the army. And once Bayezid, Mehmet's son, actually secures the throne, he calls back Ahmed Pasha to Istanbul. And since now they don't have a commander as well, the army is just sitting there. They're like 8,000 infantry and supplies which would last almost 1.5 years. And historians believe that Ahmed Pasha believed that he'd be coming back and continuing the campaign, but things kind of turned out differently. In the absence of Gedik Ahmed Pasha, what happens is that the control of the Ottomans over Otranto actually weakens. And in the meantime, because now the Italians have time, so King Ferdinand I of Naples actually raises an army and besieges the city. The siege lasted 6 months, during which the Ottoman soldiers faced extreme hardships. Some sources talk about how they had to resort to eating cats and dogs because they had run out of food. And on August 10th, 1481, the Ottomans actually surrendered Otranto to the forces of King Ferdinand. And even though the king had promised the Ottomans safe passage back to the Ottoman Empire, a lot of troops were actually held back as prisoners. Even though the conquest of Otranto and the Ottomans' stay in Italy was very short-lived, but the repercussions were huge because this had made one of the biggest fears of the Europeans into a reality, the fact that the Ottomans could cross the Adriatic and conquer them. And one of the things that Christian sources talk about is that they're really happy about Mehmet's death because they think that that's why the campaign stopped. That is one of the major reasons, of course, and also because Bayezid had different interests than his father. He wanted to solidify the empire first rather than focus on expansion. But there you go. That is the story of the Ottomans in Italy. Let me know what you think. I will see you guys next time.